Hi and welcome to another story, and today we have part 7 of The Runaway Girls by Jacqueline Wilson, continuing from chapter 13. The bed was small for one child, let alone two, but I still had the most wonderful night's sleep. I'd never really slept properly at home since nurse left. Even though I had a spacious bed with fine cotton sheets, I think it was because it was too spacious. It made me feel so little and lonely. I'd lie wide awake in the dark, dreading the dawn, because then the eerie grey light turned my wardrobe into a looming monster, all set to lurch across the room. I felt safe in this cosy room, with Kitty beside me, and all the small boys snuffling in their sleep. I didn't wake up properly until Mrs. Chubb bustled into the bedroom with 2 china mugs of milk. She had Albert Angel tied neatly to her chest with a shawl, so he had both hands free. There was no sign of a single boy. "Where's everybody gone?" I asked in surprise, sitting up. "They were up for their breakfast a good hour ago, and now they're playing out in the street. I thought you two could do for a proper rest. How are you feeling?" Mrs. Chubb asked. "I feel very well," I said. "How about you, little Kitty Crosspatch?" Mrs. Chubb pulled up the over coverlet and examined Kitty's ankle. "That's good. The swelling's gone down a bit. My golden ointment works a treat. Drink up your milk now. It will do you good." Mrs. Chubb pressed the mug in her hand. Kitty took it reluctantly and didn't say thank you, even when I nudged her. I scolded her as I helped her dress, which made her even more surly. "Do try to cheer up, Kitty. Mrs. Chubb is being so kind to us. Something smells delicious downstairs. I think she's cooking us breakfast," I said. "Don't want no breakfast," Kitty muttered as she hobbled downstairs. But she couldn't resist bacon, wedged between 2 slices of toast. The little boys left their street games and came indoors, begging for bacon too. Mrs. Chubb gave them more bread and dripping, but wouldn't let them have any bacon. "It's a special treat for these 2 poorly waifs. They need building up, see," she said. "You're too kind, Mrs. Chubb," I said happily. "That's right, she's too kind," Kitty mumbled, when she'd gone to see the washing steeping in her sink. "I can't stand her fussing about us all the time." "I like it," I said. "You're just a soft little rich girl," Kitty jeered. "And you're a hard little poor girl," I retorted. "Anyways, it's time we were off," said Kitty. But when she tried to walk properly, she went white and she had to bite her lip to stop herself crying. "You can't go. Not before your ankle gets properly better," I said, with a secret glee. "We'll have to stay here another day at least, if Mrs. Chubb lets us." "Oh, she'll be delighted," said Kitty. "Well, about you, she thinks you're wonderful, with your pretty voice and fancy manners. She doesn't like me at all." "Don't be silly. She likes us both equally," I said, though I knew Kitty was right. I felt bad about it. "I can't see why you can't be more polite to Mrs. Chubb. She's been immensely kind to us. I wish you'd act a little more grateful." "But I'm not," said Kitty. "Well, I am," I said, and I went to help Mrs. Chubb with the washing. I watched, fascinated, as she scrubbed the sheets on a dolly board and then boiled them up in a copper. Then there were several rinsings, the last with a sprinkling of Reckitt's blue, because Mrs. Chubb said it brought out the white. Then each sheet had to be put through a mangle and heaped in a huge basket ready to be hung on a line. Our sheets were sent out weekly at home and returned a day later, folded crisp and clean. I'd never given much thought to how this happened. I was amazed that it was such hard work. My arms ached trying out 2 minutes of scrubbing, and I couldn't even lift a sopping sheet, though Mrs. Chubb picked them up as easily as if they were dusters. I was a little more help when it came to pegging them on the line. It stretched from the Chubb's house across the road to the lamp-post opposite. Most of the women in the street were hanging out their own washing. Children dodged in and out of the flapping sails. The twins took a stick and started poking the sheets until Mrs. Chubb picked them up, squealing, and said she'd beat them with the stick if they carried on plaguing her. But it was clear she was only joking. She even stopped to have a little game with them, giving each a piggyback while they cried, "Gee up, horsey!" Little Albert Angel was wailing hard when we got back inside the house. Arthur Thumb and Mikey Totter was shaking his drawer, trying to soothe him. Kitty was lying on the sofa with her hands over her ears. "You could have tried to pick him up," I said. "Little Albert Angel probably needs changing." "Little Albert Angel?" Kitty repeated mockingly. "They have such daft names in this family." Mrs. Chubb said nothing, though she looked vexed. Later on, when we were in the kitchen together and Kitty was having a nap, she asked me if Kitty and I were related. "We're sisters," I said quickly, but she looked at me doubtfully. "You never are," she said. "You're like chalk and cheese, the way you speak, the way you act, the way you look." "Well, we're as good as sisters," I said. "Better, in fact. We're the best of friends." "Kitty's very lucky to have you as a best friend, Lucy, sweetheart. But I'm not so sure you're lucky to have her as a friend. I think she's been a bad influence. I'm sure she was the one who started up this shameful begging nonsense," she said. "No, I sang too, and made up all the rhymes, I said. But she didn't act as if she believed me. Kitty was a tumbling boy, doing handstands and cartwheels so cleverly. I dare say, said Mrs. Chubb. She certainly looks like one of those heathen acrobats in that fancy costume. Don't she have any other clothes to wear? She can't go out like that, not showing all that bare leg. She loves her velvet costume. I think it suits her, I said, determined to stick up for Kitty, though I wanted to stay in Mrs. Chubb's best books. It's not right or fitting for a little girl to dress like that. Perhaps I can cut down one of my own frocks for her, she said. It's very kind of you, but I think Kitty would much prefer her red velvet even so, I said. I think it would do young Kitty good to be told what to do, said Mrs. Chubb firmly. She did her best to do that over the next few days, while Kitty was still confined to the sofa or the bed. She told Kitty to stop slurping when she drank and to use her knife and fork properly when she ate. She told Kitty to have a proper wash every day. She told Kitty to brush her unruly curls. She told Kitty to say please and thank you. She told Kitty that she shouldn't argue or protest. Kitty argued and protested bitterly that first day, and the next day too. On the third day she insisted she was completely better and marched around the house, but her ankle started swelling again, and she was hobbling badly by the afternoon. Mrs. Chubb picked her up as easily as if she were little Albert Angel and put her back to bed. Why won't you do as you're told, you silly little girl? She said sternly. Nobody tells me what to do. I do what I like, Kitty insisted. When I went up to bed myself that evening, I could tell Kitty had been crying. Oh, Kitty, I said, trying to cuddle her. She went rigid. I hate it here. I hate all these silly boys. I hate that wailing baby, and I especially hate her, she muttered. She's only trying to look after you, I said. I don't need looking after. I can look after myself, said Kitty. My ankle's nearly better, and my wrist, and all those stupid scratches. We're getting out of here. We're leaving tomorrow, right? I hesitated. I didn't want to leave. I loved living in this cosy house with all the Chubb family. I loved helping Mrs. Chubb with all the household chores. I loved tending little Albert Angel. I loved playing silly games with all the little boys. I loved going to greet Mr. Chubb with Tommy Magpie. I loved Nelson, who whinnied when he saw me now and gave me a ride on his back. I wanted to stay part of this safe, kind family forever and eat their tasty food every day and sleep in the bed with the knitted coverlet every night. Why, oh why, couldn't Kitty want that too? She knew how to be sweet and charming when she liked. If she would only hold her tongue and smile, then I was sure she'd be petted like me. She just had to give away a little. Kitty seemed incapable of giving an inch. She stayed as rigid as iron. So, you want to stay here, she said, when I still hadn't answered. Perhaps just for a little while, until you're completely better, I suggested tentatively. I am better. You just don't want to come with me, said Kitty, grinding the words out. Oh, I do, just not quite yet, I said. Well, I'm going tomorrow, whether you come to or not, said Kitty, and she turned her back on me and seemed to go to sleep straight away. I lay wide awake and fretting, wondering what to do. Kitty seemed in a softer mood the next morning, to my great relief. She even thanked Mrs. Chubb for her breakfast and drank her milk without slurping once. Good girl, said Mrs. Chubb. Now, see what I've got for you, my dear. I stayed up late last night getting it finished. She produced a pink cotton dress, similar to the one she wore under her apron, but cut down to a tiny size, a Kitty size. Oh, said Kitty. It was the wrong sort of O, one of horror. Mrs. Chubb misunderstood. Don't worry, Kitty. I've got 2 other dresses, and I don't have any little girls to use them up. Yes, but I didn't ask you to make it for me, said Kitty. You see, I don't really wear dresses, not pink ones like that. I know, dear, but you'll look just like a little lady in it. Just you wait and see. Slip it on now. Kitty backed away from her, but Mrs. Chubb was used to capturing children and getting them dressed. She held Kitty tight with one hand, slipped the dress over her head with the other, and then pulled her arms through the sleeves. There now, she said triumphantly. Come and see how sweet you look. She took hold of Kitty by the shoulders, steered her into her own bedroom and brought her up short in front of the looking-glass. Kitty stared, eyes open wide. That's not me, she mumbled. Doesn't it make a difference, dear? You look quite pretty. And we'll see if we can buy you a decent pair of stockings too. You'll have to wear those strange little slippers for now, but that can't be helped. Kitty wasn't listening. She was looking agonised. I could see why. The dress was well stitched and in proportion, but pale and limp from many scrubbings in the wash-tub. It made Kitty look pale and limp too, and the pastel pink turned her tanned skin sallow. She didn't look brave and bold and bizarre anymore. She looked like any wishy-washy little London girl from the back streets. I'm not wearing it, she said, desperately trying to pull it over her head. Don't be silly, Kitty, said Mrs. Chubb. I'm not being silly. I don't want to look silly. I won't wear it, and you can't make me. She must have seen me looking horrified and bit her lip. I'm sorry. It was very kind of you to make it for me. I just don't want it. Give it to Lucy or save it till you have a baby girl, but I absolutely won't wear it myself. Thank you very much. She was trying to be polite now, but somehow she was making it worse, as if she were mocking Mrs. Chubb's insistence on good manners. Mrs. Chubb herself went very red in the face. She said nothing further. She just took the dress and marched off with it. Oh, Kitty, now you've done it, I said despairingly. You've hurt her feelings terribly, and you've upset her because she can't have any more babies. I didn't know, did I? I didn't ask her to make me the dreadful dress. You saw what it looked like, Lucy, said Kitty, hurriedly putting her acrobat outfit on and stroking the velvet for comfort. Yes, but she meant well. She must have spent hours on it, sewing it by candlelight. She was just trying to be kind to you, I said. She wants you to fit in her family. Yes, but I don't fit. I don't want to fit. I'm not this sort of family girl, said Kitty. Don't you like having a family? I asked. Don't you feel lonely without one? I just want to have a family of two. I had Gaffer. Now I've got you. That's all I need. I don't see why we want all this lot, said Kitty reproachfully. They make me feel safe, I said, and loved and cared for. It's almost like having Nurse back. You're soft, you are. Silly little rich girl wanting a nursey, said Kitty. Stop being so mean to me, I said, and I gave her a push. She pushed me back, quite hard. I stumbled and landed on my bottom. Mrs. Chubb came rushing back. What's all this noise? Oh, my goodness, are you two fighting? No, I said quickly. Yes, said Kitty. Oh, Lucy, sweetheart, you poor little thing, said Mrs. Chubb, helping me up. Did Kitty knock you to the floor? We were just playing. She didn't mean to knock me right over, and I'm not the slightest bit hurt, truly, I said. Mrs. Chubb didn't believe me. I've had enough of you and your tantrums today, Kitty, she said sternly. You can stay in this bedroom today as a punishment. I'm not having you near all the other children if you can't be trusted to behave yourself. You can't make me stay in this blooming bedroom, Kitty declared defiantly. Oh, yes, I can, said Mrs. Chubb. She took hold of my hand, whisked me out of the room with her, and then turned the key in the lock of the door. There, she said, putting the key in her apron pocket. Let me out, Kitty called, and she started yelling, a string of strange words in a language I didn't understand. Even so, their meaning was quite clear. She was unmistakably cursing Mrs. Chubb. She looked immensely shocked. Oh, my lord! Hark at her! Come with me at once, Lucy, she said, and walked me down the stairs with her. Kitty heard our footsteps and started screaming. Oh, poor Kitty! Listen, she's crying so. That's just temper, said Mrs. Chubb. She'll stop when her throat gets sore. You are just joking, aren't you, Mrs. Chubb? I asked. I mean, you're not really going to keep Kitty locked in the bedroom. She has to learn. I can't be doing with her wild ways. I can't have any roustabouts in my household, not with so many little ones running around. I dare say the twins can look after themselves, but what if she pushed poor little Arthur Thumb or Mikey Trotter? What if she was rough with little Albert Angel? Said Mrs. Chubb. But she wouldn't, not ever. Kitty's not like that. She's really kind. She's looked after me so. She's only being so surly because she hates feeling helpless. She's just not used to this sort of life, I said. Oh, you're such a dear forgiving child, Lucy, sweetheart. But I do know best, you know. I'm rearing 6 splendid boys, and the whole street compliments me on my fine family. All the other mothers want me to mind their children. It's how I earn my twopenny worth so we can have good food on the table and a roaring fire in winter. But if I let young Kitty rule the roost and answer back and hit the other children, then some of the little ones will copy her. Then where will we be? I know Kitty must seem very rude and naughty and ungrateful, but she's truly a dear sweet girl too, I insisted. Kitty's screams were still piercing, even though we were downstairs now. Mrs. Chubb took no notice and folded the new dress in soft paper and tucked it in a drawer. Her hands were trembling. I'll save it for one of the other little girls that are mine, she said, seeing as I can't ever hope for a daughter myself now. Kitty sounds so upset, I said, nearly in tears myself. I'm sure she's learned her lesson. Can't we let her out? She needs to rest that ankle of hers, said Mrs. Chubb. It will do her good to have a quiet day. You can't keep her locked up all day, I said. What about when she has to pay a visit? There's a chamber pot under the bed, and I'll take her something out to eat at lunchtime. Don't look so tragic, Lucy. I'd act the same with any of my own children if they were as wilful and wild. Now, I thought I'd bake another pie today. I'd better get busy. I didn't know what to do. I felt I should stamp my foot and start screaming too, so I could be locked up with Kitty. But I badly wanted Mrs. Chubb to keep liking me. I was a little bit scared of her now too. Miss Groan had punished me often enough, but she had never actually locked me away. I could still hear Kitty's screams in the kitchen, even with the little ones playing a noisy game of marching soldiers. Tommy Magpie was the captain of the little army and drilled them vigorously. "You can be a soldier too if you want, Lucy," he offered. "I don't really feel like being a soldier right this minute, Tommy Magpie," I said. "I just feel so sorry for Kitty." "But she's been bad," he said. "Hasn't she, Ma?" "Yes, she has, dear. Lucy, come and watch me make the pastry. Let's see if you can rub the fat into the flour." "You've got neat little hands. I think you'd make a light pastry." I felt I was being a traitor to Kitty, but I let Mrs. Chubb teach me how to make a pie, even though the screaming upstairs continued relentlessly. "Kitty sounds really unhappy, Ma," said Tommy Magpie, nibbling on a shred of raw pastry from the tabletop. "I dare say," said Mrs. Chubb, "but she'll quieten down soon. Don't you eat raw pastry, Tommy Magpie, or you'll get worms." Mrs. Chubb rolled the pastry out to make the pie, and then gave me a leftover strip to make jam tarts. I made 10 tiny ones, and decided that I'd keep the best for Kitty. Maybe I'd give her 2 when she was released at last. Her screams were getting hoarser now, making my own throat ache. "She sounds as if she's really in pain, Mrs. Chubb," I said. "There's nothing up in that there bedroom that could possibly hurt her," she said. "Perhaps she stamped her foot and hurt her poor ankle all over again," I suggested. "May? My, you've got a vivid imagination, Lucy, sweetheart," said Mrs. Chubb, unmoved. We put the pie and the tarts in the oven and cleared up the table. Then little Albert Angel woke for his mid-morning feed, and Mrs. Chubb lay on the sofa to do this. The room filled with the sweet smell of baking pastry. "It's a shame to disturb the little pet," said Mrs. Chubb. "Do you think you could have a peep and see if they're ready to come out of the oven, Lucy? Wind a thick cloth around both your hands to make sure you don't get burnt." I did as I was told, proud that she'd trust me to do this. The jam tarts were shining red with raspberry jam, and little Albert Angel was changed and nodding back to sleep again, when I suddenly realised something. My heart started thudding with a new fear. "Kitty stopped screaming," I said. "Yes, I know. She stopped a good 10 minutes ago," said Mrs. Chubb. "I knew she'd get tired of it eventually." "Can I go and see if she's all right?" I asked. "Of course she's all right. She simply tired herself out and gone to sleep. Don't you go disturbing her, or she'll start all over again, and my ears are ringing as it is. What a temper that child has," said Mrs. Chubb. "It's just that she hates being locked up," I said. I was getting terribly worried now. What if Kitty had tried to escape? She couldn't get out of the door. What if she tried to get out of the window? If she jumped, she wouldn't just hurt her ankle again. She could easily break her neck. My chest was so tight, I could hardly get the words out. "She could have jumped out of the window," I said in a rush. "No, she couldn't. It's nailed shut, because I needed to make sure none of my boys tried any silly tricks like that," said Mrs. Chubb. She came over to me and put her arms around me. "There now. Stop worrying your pretty little head of yours." It worrited until I thought it would explode. I begged Mrs. Chubb to let me take a jam tart up to Kitty, but she made me wait until dinner time, and even then frowned at the idea of giving her a treat. By rights, she should have plain bread and water as she's being punished, but I don't hold with a child going without proper nourishment, and she looks half starved already. We'll give her a bowl of my tomato soup, and she can have a dab of butter on her bread, but no jam tarts," she said firmly. She wouldn't let me take the meal up to Kitty, no matter how hard I begged. She took it herself. I waited, holding my breath, wondering if Kitty would start screaming again. She might even take it into her head to throw the cup at Mrs. Chubb. I looked for scarlet splashes on her apron when she came down, but it remained pristine. "How is she?" I asked breathlessly. "Well enough. At least she's quiet now. She's in a bit of a sulk and wouldn't say a word, but that's better than all that screaming," said Mrs. Chubb. I blinked, thinking this over. "She did sit up, though, and start eating?" I asked. "I'm sure she did, the moment I was gone," she said. "But you're certain she was all right? Was she asleep? Did you listen to make sure she was breathing?" I said, the questions tumbling out of my mouth. "For goodness sake, little Missy Worrypot, your tiresome friend is perfectly well. Now stop this nonsense and eat your own soup," she said. I was even more worried when she sent Tommy Magpie to fetch Kitty's tray an hour later, and he brought her food back untouched. "Her spoon's shining clean, so she hasn't even had a lick of soup, and her bread hasn't got a single bite," he said, in wonder that any child could leave her lunch. "Can I eat it up, Ma?" "You may have the bread, son, but eat it quick before the other kiddies see." She looked at me. "Perhaps you'd like to share it with Lucy, sweetheart." "I don't want it," I said. "Now, don't you go into a sulk too," said Mrs. Chubb. "You're my good girl." She settled herself on the couch with the baby and then patted the space by her side. "Come and have a cuddle, dearie." I couldn't resist. I walked over to her and she pulled me close to her. "There now, my 2 new babies," she said. I closed my eyes and nestled into her. It felt so good to be held in her warm, strong arms. I still worried desperately about Kitty, but even so I found I was lulled to sleep. Little Albert Angel slept too, snuffling happily. But then Tommy Magpie came to report that the twins were having a fight over a toy top, and Mickey Totter had tried to climb the stairs and tumbled down again. Mrs. Chubb sighed and got to her feet. "Can you hold little Albert, sweetheart?" she asked. He started wailing, wanting his mother back, but I held him against my chest and walked him around the room, showing him things to distract him. And he soon perked up. I jogged up and down and liked this a lot, chuckling away, one of his little starfish hands clutching my finger. Mrs. Chubb smiled when she came back into the room. "You two look such a picture. You're like a real big sister to him, Lucy, sweetheart," she said, her head on one side. I tried to be sisterly to all the Chubb children. Tommy Magpie showed me his secret stash of licorice and insisted I have a nibble at the end of a stick. I realised this was a great favour and tried to act grateful. "It's the best taste in the world. I'd have licorice for breakfast, licorice for dinner, and licorice for supper," Tommy Magpie declared. "Licorice porridge, licorice soup, licorice pie, all washed down with a jolly glass of licorice cordial," I said, which made him laugh. It was harder talking to the twins because they were such fidgety little boys who couldn't keep still. I wished Kitty was free to teach them how to tumble. They knew how to do forward rolls already, so I sang the Tumbling Boy song while they performed the actions. I could see they had the makings of a good comedy act that would maybe bring in the crowds, but I knew Mrs. Chubb would faint at such an idea. It was easy enough to entertain Arthur Thumb. I simply told him a story, pulling him onto my lap. The Chubbs didn't have any proper books, only a big Bible, so I told him the story of Tom Thumb instead, and he loved this, though the giant ogres made him squirm a lot. I hoped he wouldn't have bad dreams about them. Mikey Totter couldn't concentrate on a complicated story. His favourite game was Peep-Bo. I hid my face in my paisley shawl and then bobbed out at him, going, "Peep-Bo." Mikey squealed with laughter every time, wanting me to play this game again and again and again. "Give poor Lucy, sweetheart, a rest, Mikey," said Mrs. Chubb. "You wouldn't like to peel the potatoes with me, dear? It would be such a help when there's so many of us." I tied the shawl around my waist like an apron, but Mrs. Chubb tutted and took it from me, wrapping it up carefully and putting it on a high shelf out of reach from the little ones with their sticky fingers. "Such a beautiful shawl," she said, rubbing it against her cheek. She hesitated and then spoke in a lowered tone. "Did it belong to your dear father?" "Yes, it did," I said sadly, wanting her to feel sorry for me. I couldn't tell her I'd stolen it from a church pew. It didn't seem a total lie. I was sure my mother must have owned shawls, maybe even a paisley one. "Well, it's very precious. I can see that. It suits you beautifully. The blue background bringing out the blue of your eyes," said Mrs. Chubb. "I've got blue eyes too, but all my boys have brown eyes, taking after their father. If I'd been blessed with a little daughter, I'm sure she'd have had blue eyes." She smiled at me wistfully, and I stood on a stool beside her at the sink while we peeled all the potatoes. It was cold, dirty work, nowhere near as much fun as making the pie. It was heating up in the oven now and smelling delicious all over again. When the potatoes were all peeled at last, Mrs. Chubb put them into a huge saucepan and set them on the range to boil. Tommy Magpie set off to meet his pa, and I wrapped the shawl around my shoulders and tagged along with him again, eager for another ride on Nelson. I wondered how I could enjoy myself when poor Kitty was still locked up in the bedroom, but I tried to stop feeling guilty by telling myself that it was her own fault, after all. If she'd only accepted her dress politely and acted grateful, then she'd have been able to have a lovely day too. Her ankle might be strong enough now for her to walk to the stables. I was sure she'd like Nelson, and love to ride on him too. When we got home, Mrs. Chubb was trying to mash the potatoes, while Mikey Trotter clung to her skirts, and the twins tormented Arthur Thumb. I begged her to let me take Kitty her supper, with a little jam tart for pudding. "Where is little Miss Kitty?" Mr. Chubb asked, cuffing both twins, though they simply laughed at him. "She's been in bed all day as a punishment for acting so wild," said Mrs. Chubb, mashing away fiercely. She looked as if she'd like to mash Kitty too. "All day?" said Mr. Chubb. "That's a little steep, isn't it, Mrs. C?" "She wasn't just incredibly rude to me, she knocked little Lucy to the floor," said Mrs. Chubb, red in the face. "Yes, but she didn't mean to, and I pushed her first," I said. "There you are. Kiddies have their little scraps. Look at the twins," said Mr. Chubb. "You don't understand, Mr. C," said Mrs. Chubb. She lowered her voice. "I'll explain later, when the children are all in bed." "But don't you think it's time we, let Kitty out of bed?" said Mr. Chubb. "Well, she needed to rest that ankle to get it properly better. It's for her own good," said Mrs. Chubb. "She can get up tomorrow." So, can I take her supper up to her now? I asked again, opened my eyes wide. Please, dear kind Mrs. Chubb. She laughed at me. You might look like an angel, Lucy, sweetheart, but you're an artful little monkey. Very well. She cut Kitty a generous portion of pie and mash, with a glass of milk and my jam tart on a pretty little saucer, and set it all out nicely on a tray. Then she took the bedroom door key out of her pocket and handed it to me. Carry the tray up carefully now. Try not to spill, there's a good girl. I went up the stairs slowly and then set the tray down while I fumbled with the key in the lock until it turned. I picked up the tray and opened the door and gasped. Kitty was standing right in front of me, holding a full chamber pot up high. What are you doing? I cried. Oh, for goodness sake, it's you, Lucy, said Kitty, setting the pot down on the floor to my huge relief. I thought it would be old Ma Chubby Chops. I was going to chuck it at her and then barge past. I reckon I had a good chance of getting out the front door before anyone caught me. You were going to run away without me. I said I would, didn't I? Said Kitty. But then she added, I hoped you'd come too. Would you have? Put that pot back into the bed. I don't like looking at it. And I don't think we'd have a chance of getting away. Not with Mr. Chubb there and all these little boys. They'd grab hold of us. We'll have to find another way. So you will run away with me? Kitty asked urgently. I want to stay here, but if you won't stay too, I suppose I'll have to go with you, I said, sighing. Oh, Lucy! Kitty flung her arms around my neck and gave me a fierce hug. But we'll have to make a proper plan. We don't both want to end up locked in here all the time, do we? I said. Meanwhile, why don't you eat your supper before it gets cold? And see that jam tart? I made it. I vowed I wouldn't eat anything at all while she kept me a prisoner, said Kitty. But I could tell by the way she was looking at the tray that she was starving. Eat it. You'll need all your strength if we run away tomorrow, I said. Well, maybe I'll just eat the jam tart then, seeing as you made it specially for me, said Kitty. She crammed it into her mouth whole and then set upon the pie and mash, washing it down with great slurps of milk. I didn't have the heart to comment on her manners. I haven't had my supper yet, so I better go and eat it before one of the boys does, I said, picking up her tray. The plates and saucer were so clean, they looked as if they'd been washed already. That was good, especially the jam tart. Don't suppose I could have any more, could I, seeing as I didn't have anything at dinner time? Kitty asked. That was your own fault, but I'll see. I think Mrs. Chubb is feeling a bit worried about locking you up for so long, I said. I went downstairs. The boys had all finished their suppers and were playing a violent game of Noah's Ark on the living room floor, making the lions and tigers eat all the smaller animals. I sat down in the kitchen by myself and ate my own meal, which had been keeping warm between two plates on top of the range. Mr. Chubb was out on the backyard smoking his pipe, and Mrs. Chubb was keeping him company. I could hear them murmuring to each other outside the window. I wasn't concentrating on what they were saying until I heard Mrs. Chubb say the name Kitty. I swallowed my last mouthful and crept right up to the window, careful to keep behind the curtain so they wouldn't look around and see me. I pressed my ear to the glass and heard more distinctly. She's got to go, said Mrs. Chubb. I can't abide the child. She's such a bad influence on Lucy, sweetheart. She'll stick up for that wild little thing no matter what. But what are you going to do? You surely can't turn her out into the streets to fend for herself, said Mr. Chubb. It's where she came from, isn't it? You can tell she's never lived in a proper house with a decent family. She actually cursed me today, pointing her finger and talking some strange heathen language. I think she's a gypsy child. With those big dark eyes and wild hair and savage temper, there's a gypsy camp over at the Common. I reckon we should take her up there, so she can be among her own sort, said Mrs. Chubb. But what about Lucy? She'll never forgive you if you take her little pal away, said Mr. Chubb. We'll tell her she's run away of her own accord. She's such a trusting little soul, I reckon she'll believe us, said Mrs. Chubb. I was shaken to the core. How could my own dear Mrs. Chubb betray me so utterly? To think I wanted her as my mother. I didn't want her to be her little girl any more. I'd never let her take Kitty away from me. Never, ever, ever. And that is where we will leave part 7 of The Runaway Girls by Jacqueline Wilson. I'll be back soon with the next part of this fantastic story and lots more stories and videos coming your way in the near future. If you'd like to subscribe or hit a like, that's always appreciated. Thanks for listening, guys. Take care. Bye-bye.